What if the thoughts currently occupying your mind are literally rewriting the physical code of your reality, and you're just letting it happen on complete autopilot? It is a concept that completely flips your understanding of daily life. I mean, realizing you're sitting right at the control panel of your own existence, but you've essentially fallen asleep at the wheel. The machinery just keeps turning, building your world out of random, unexamined debris you picked up from a billboard or a cynical conversation. Well, if you're ready to wake up and actually take control of that autopilot, you are in the right place. This explanation of autosuggestion from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill can also be read in our blog, waywat.com. Today, we are unlocking a really profound piece of esoteric engineering. What we are looking at here is not about surface-level, modern self-help platitudes. When you strip away the decades of watered-down interpretations, what you are left with is an incredibly potent ancient occult technology of the mind. We are dissecting a precise schematic for transmuting invisible, intangible desires into actual, tangible physical reality. And out of that entire methodology, our focus right now is on the principle of autosuggestion. I really want to break down the actual biology and the esoteric mechanics of what this is, why your current bank account or your career looks the way it does right now because of it, and, most importantly, how you can actually hack this machinery to fundamentally alter your trajectory. To really grasp autosuggestion, we have to rebuild our understanding of the anatomy of the mind from the ground up. In plain, unvarnished language, autosuggestion is self-suggestion. It encompasses absolutely all the stimuli, all the messages, all the sensory inputs that you administer to yourself through your 5 senses. But here's the critical part. It is the sole, exclusive agency of communication between your conscious, thinking mind and the hidden, action-oriented realm of your subconscious mind. It is not just a bridge. It is the only road in. There is absolutely no back door. You have to picture the mind as divided into 2 fiercely distinct territories. You've got the conscious mind, which acts as the outer guard, the rational filter. And then you have the subconscious, which is the inner sanctum. The absolute, unbreakable rule of this esoteric engineering is that no thought, whether it's positive, negative, constructive, or destructive, can enter that inner sanctum without the aid of autosuggestion. The conscious mind is literally catching everything at the door. All sensory impressions are stopped by that conscious thinking mind. It evaluates them, and it can either pass them along to the subconscious or it can reject them entirely. Let me map this onto something a bit more modern so it clicks. Think of your conscious mind as the head of security at an ultra-exclusive private estate, and the subconscious as the pristine inner mansion. The security chief's job is to check credentials, pat people down, and keep the intruders out. Keep the junk away. But if the security chief gets distracted, or worse, falls completely asleep on the job, anyone can wander past the gates into the mansion and just completely trash the place. And the tragedy is that, for the vast majority of humanity, that guard has been asleep since childhood. Nature built us with absolute, ironclad control over the material that reaches our subconscious. We have the inherent authority to instruct that guard on who gets in and who doesn't. But most people rarely, if ever, exercise that control. They just leave the gates completely unguarded. Why do we default to leaving it completely unattended? Because guarding the gate requires intense, deliberate cognitive effort. The conscious mind consumes a massive amount of metabolic energy. It is exhausting to constantly interrogate every single thought, every advertisement you see, or every casual snarky comment a friend makes. So to conserve energy, the brain just automates the process. It lets the guard doze off. This brings up a brilliant, timeless metaphor. The subconscious mind is likened to wildly fertile soil in a garden. It is rich, dark, life-giving earth. Now, the soil does not have a moral compass. It doesn't care what seeds you plant, and it doesn't judge the harvest. It just grows whatever is dropped into it. If you don't deliberately, intentionally plant the seeds of your desired crops, the wind is just going to blow the weeds of your daily environment right over the fence, and they take root. Because the soil is so incredibly fertile, they will completely choke out your potential. Let's contextualize those weeds for a second. Because we aren't just talking about having a bad day. We're talking about the subtle, insidious programming of your environment. Think about the creeping dread you passively absorb from doom scrolling through endless negative headlines, or the defeatist attitudes you soak up from friends who constantly complain about how the system is rigged. These are seeds falling straight into that fertile soil of the unguarded subconscious. Because people neglect their inner garden, their environment programs them with poverty, fear, and limitation, which they just accept as normal. They assume their anxiety or financial struggle is just how the world is. But the reality is that you have absolute control over what reaches that soil. By failing to exercise that control, you are defaulting to whatever the chaotic, fearful world decides to throw at you. You become a reflection of your environment, rather than a projector of your own desires. To the conscious, rational mind, yes, it is absolute delusion. But this is exactly where the profound concept of legitimate deceit comes in. Yes, you are lying. You must intentionally play a trick on your subconscious mind. You have to act and, more importantly, physically feel as if you are already in possession of the thing you desire. And the reason you can get away with this trick is a quirk of our biological hardware. The subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a real physical experience and a vividly, emotionally imagined one. That is a staggering concept. It literally doesn't know the difference between a memory of an event that actually occurred and a vivid fantasy of an event that hasn't happened yet. Neurologically speaking, the exact same brain regions light up, whether you are looking at a beautiful sunset or you just close your eyes and vividly imagine that exact same sunset. So if you feed your subconscious the emotional signature of wealth, it accepts that wealth is your current absolute reality because it doesn't know any better. And because the sole mechanical function of the subconscious is to align your physical external reality with your internal programming, it immediately sets to work making that imagined reality come true. You are using the physiological mechanics of your brain to completely override the evidence of your current circumstances. So, if emotion is the spark and we have to utilize this legitimate deceit to trick our subconscious, how do we actually harden that into permanence? Because having a fleeting 5-minute moment of feeling rich while you're meditating is one thing. Maintaining that belief when you walk outside and face the real world is entirely different. That transition from a fleeting feeling to a permanent state of being is what is known as the genesis of faith. We really need to divorce the word faith from its traditional religious connotations for a moment here. In this specific esoteric context, faith is not a magical gift bestowed upon you by the universe. It is a highly specific, manufactured state of mind. It can be induced, it can be engineered from scratch through the deliberate application of autosuggestion. And the only known method for the voluntary development of the emotion of faith is relentless repetition. The repetition of these emotionally charged instructions to the subconscious. So, we know we have this gatekeeper, and we know we need to wake the guard up and actually take control of what gets planted in the mansion. But here is where it gets tricky, and where this esoteric concept gets wildly misunderstood. You cannot just stand at the gate and rationally explain to your subconscious what you want. You can't just hand the security guard a spreadsheet of your goals and expect results. The spreadsheet will be completely ignored and tossed in the trash. This brings us to the alchemy of emotion, which is arguably the single most critical point where people attempting to use this mind technology just fall flat on their faces. Repeating plain, unemotional dictionary definition words is entirely useless. The subconscious mind is not a logic engine. It is an emotional engine. It only recognizes and acts upon thoughts that have been emotionalized. They must be saturated with deep, visceral feeling. This is so counterintuitive to how we're raised. Society relentlessly conditions us to believe that cold, hard reason is the apex of human intelligence. We're taught to suppress our emotions in business, to be stoic, to look at things objectively. But cold reason is completely sterile when it comes to the actual mechanics of creation. It cannot birth a new reality. The emotional component is like the spark to a combustion engine. You can have all the premium fuel in the world, which represents your logical thoughts and your perfectly articulated goals, but without the active spark of emotion, the engine is never going to turn over. Emotion is the active catalytic ingredient that transforms a passive, dead thought into a vibrant, manifesting force. Let me paint a very specific picture of this so you can really grasp the mechanics. Imagine an architect who wants to design a revolutionary, eco-friendly skyscraper. If they just sit at their desk and repeat the phrase, "I will build a multi-million-dollar tower," in a monotone voice while staring blankly at a wall, absolutely nothing happens. Their subconscious is completely deaf to that frequency. The guard doesn't even recognize the language being spoken because there is no spark. Now imagine that same architect closing their eyes. They aren't just thinking about the building. They are actively hallucinating the experience of its success. They physically feel the smooth texture of the ribbon being cut at the grand opening. They feel the slight exhausted ache in their feet after a long day of overseeing construction, but it's mixed with the intense rush of pride when the final pane of glass is installed. They experience the swelling joy in their chest as they see their building reshape the city skyline. That emotional charge, that literal physical sensation in the body, that is the spark. That is the exact mechanism that successfully smuggles the blueprint past the conscious guard and plants it deep into the subconscious. The subconscious speaks exclusively in the language of feeling. Positive emotions like faith, desire, enthusiasm, and romance. These are the high-frequency carriers that transmit your orders effectively, but we have to be incredibly careful here because the mechanism works flawlessly in reverse. Negative emotions like fear, jealousy, and anger are equally potent. In fact, for most people, they transmit orders much faster because we are evolutionarily wired to feel negative emotions way more intensely for survival. But the foundational rule remains. Plain words completely devoid of emotion do not even register on the subconscious radar. Now, I have to challenge this because this presents a massive, incredibly difficult practical dilemma if you are currently going through a hard time. How do you genuinely feel the swelling emotion of having incredible success when your current physical reality is screaming at you that you are broke? If you are staring at a mountain of credit card debt and a dwindling checking account, how do you logically summon the genuine, relaxed confidence of a millionaire? Isn't that just lying to yourself? It borders on delusion. Any impulsive thought that is repeatedly passed on to the subconscious mind is eventually accepted as absolute truth. It does not matter how wildly fabricated the lie is initially. If you repeat it enough and you saturate it with enough emotional intensity, the subconscious eventually capitulates. The guard taps out. The inner sanctum accepts it as a hard, unshakable fact. And the millisecond it's accepted as fact, the subconscious begins translating that thought into its physical equivalent by the most practical, direct means available to you. It is essentially the psychological equivalent of training for a marathon. You don't just lace up your shoes on day one and expect to run 26 miles without collapsing. You would destroy yourself. You start with short distances. You repeatedly condition your cardiovascular system, and your body adapts. It grows stronger to handle the repeated stress. With autosuggestion, you are doing reps with your thoughts. You are lifting the heavy weight of this new fabricated reality over and over and over again until the neural pathways adapt and the fragile belief actually hardens into unshakable faith. The architecture of belief is built entirely through reps. And let's look at how this mechanism operates in the negative. Because sadly, that is how the majority of humanity experiences it. Think about someone who moves to a new city and finds themselves living with highly pessimistic, cynical roommates. At first, the newcomer hates the negativity. It's abrasive. Their conscious guard is pushing it away. But they are subjected to it every single day. After months of daily exposure, they begin to absorb that frequency. They start complaining about the local traffic. Then they complain about the economy, and eventually, they become the most bitter person in the house. What happened? Their subconscious passively accepted the repeated negative suggestions of their environment as their new absolute reality. The weeds completely took over the garden because the repetition just wore down the guard. The relentless repetition of that cynicism induced a dark, twisted faith in negativity. The exact same biological and esoteric mechanism applies to wealth, success, and supreme confidence. You must voluntarily submit yourself to the rigorous repetition of positive, goal-oriented thoughts until your mind has absolutely no choice but to accept them as your baseline reality. This highlights something incredibly dangerous about the default mode of human existence. If the subconscious is just a fertile garden and it genuinely does not care what seeds you plant, it means you can accidentally engineer your own absolute ruin without ever realizing you're even holding the shovel. This is perhaps the most sobering, terrifying aspect of this entire philosophy. The subconscious mind makes absolutely no distinction between constructive and destructive thought impulses. There is no safety net. It will translate a thought driven by sheer terror and anxiety into physical reality just as quickly, just as efficiently, and just as obediently as a thought driven by courage and absolute faith. So when people talk about being cursed or having a string of terrible luck, the myth of bad luck completely shatters. There are millions of people walking the earth right now who experience constant, grinding misfortune simply because they are unknowingly using autosuggestion against themselves as a weapon. They constantly vocalize their fears to anyone who will listen. They deeply, viscerally feel the anxiety of their limitations. They obsess over the concept of poverty, and their subconscious hears all that. It acts as a blind, faithful servant, taking those dominant, emotionalized thoughts and obediently building that exact misfortune for them in the physical world. When you lie awake at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, obsessively worrying about a worst-case scenario, or playing out a potential financial collapse, you aren't just worrying in a vacuum. You are actively practicing a dark, highly effective form of autosuggestion. You are quite literally praying with deep emotion for the exact thing you do not want to happen. You are handing the internal architect of your reality a hyper-detailed blueprint of your own destruction, and you are stamping it with a high-voltage emotion of terror. And the subconscious just says, understood, building this immediately. Consider a freelance artist who is constantly terrified of never finding clients. It consumes their waking hours. They talk about it with their partner at dinner. They lose sleep over it. That is a lot of emotional fuel. Their subconscious takes that emotionalized terror as a set of firm, non-negotiable instructions. It then starts guiding their physical actions, often operating entirely below the threshold of their conscious awareness. It begins to actively sabotage them to fulfill the prophecy. Step by subtle step, it makes them underprice their work out of desperation. It causes them to project a nervous, needy energy in client meetings that repels high-paying commissions. It creates friction and doubt in their daily decision-making until they literally manifest the exact financial drought they were so desperately terrified of. They set their sails of thought toward the rocks, and the impartial law of autosuggestion simply blew the ship exactly where they steered it. It is deeply unsettling. So how do we stop steering the ship into the rocks? We need to pivot to the actual ritual, the physical mechanics of application, because everything we've discussed so far could easily be misconstrued as a vague, esoteric philosophy of just thinking positive thoughts. But this outlines a highly specific, uncompromising ritual of transmutation. The mechanics must be followed to the letter. You must create a clear, exact written statement of what you desire. You cannot be vague. You can't just say, I want to be rich. You must define the exact specific amount of money or the precise professional milestone. You must define the exact timeline, the date by which you intend to acquire it. And crucially, this is where most people tap out. You must clearly state what you intend to give in return for this wealth. The esoteric principle here is that there is no such thing as something for nothing in this universe. You must define the service or value you are going to inject into the world to warrant the return. Once you have this written document, a piece of paper in your wallet is useless. The protocol dictates that you must read this written statement aloud twice a day, specifically just before retiring to sleep at night and immediately after waking up in the morning. And as you read it, you must concentrate, close your eyes, and use your imagination to actually see, feel, and believe in the physical manifestation of your goal, as if it is already sitting in your bank account right now. Why those specific times? It comes back to the biological state of the conscious mind, the security guard. Just before sleep and right after waking, your brain is transitioning through specific brainwave frequencies. You're moving out of the high alert beta state and into the relaxed alpha and theta states. During these windows, your rational conscious mind is incredibly groggy. Its defenses are severely lowered. The threshold between the conscious and subconscious is at its absolute thinnest. The subconscious is highly, almost dangerously, receptive to suggestion because the conscious mind lacks the energy to actively fight off inputs with logic, doubt, and cynicism. You intentionally bypass the guard while he's yawning and checking his watch, slipping the blueprint right past him into the mansion. But remember our rule. The mere reading of the words is of no consequence without the emotion. You must mix the reading with the intense emotion of faith. You have to hammer the thought in, and this requires absolute, unwavering persistence. Your subconscious mind works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Occasional, spasmodic effort, trying this routine for 3 days, feeling silly, and quitting is completely useless. You must hammer the thought until it becomes a fixed, automatic habit. If you are weak in persistence, you will be defeated by your own biological programming before you even cross the starting line. Now, some might assume the psychological work replaces the physical labor. That is the magic wand fallacy. The thought is the genesis, but the manifestation strictly requires action. The subconscious mind is not going to manipulate gravity and drop bags of cash into your lap. What it is going to do is hand you plans. It will deliver sudden, inexplicable flashes of inspiration. It will provide what we refer to as hunches, operating through the sixth sense. As you saturate your mind with a burning desire for your goal, your subconscious will draw upon the surrounding environment to formulate highly practical, physical steps for you to take. It gives you the map, but you still have to put on your boots and walk the road. When these plans flash into your mind, you must treat them with immense respect, and you must act upon them immediately. Do not wait for the perfect plan. Do not wait until you feel completely ready. The person who waits for perfect conditions will never take a single step. When the inspiration strikes, you must view it as a direct telegram from your subconscious. Failure to execute physical action immediately is fatal to the entire process. The energy dissipates, the guard wakes up, and the opportunity vanishes. This leads us into the metaphysical piece of the puzzle, broadcasting to the ether. Thoughts are not just abstract, isolated, subjective occurrences trapped inside your skull. Thoughts are a literal, physical form of energy, vibrating at an exceedingly high rate. Your brain is explicitly defined as both a broadcasting station and a receiving station for the vibration of thought. When a thought is mixed with deep, burning emotion, its vibrational frequency is massively stepped up. It becomes a literal magnetic force, broadcast outward into the ether, the universal field that connects all things. It's like tuning a satellite receiver. If your internal dish is permanently aimed at the frequency of static fear and scarcity, you are broadcasting that exact signal out into the universe. And because of the mechanics of resonance, you can only receive signals on that exact same bandwidth. You literally cannot hear the broadcast of opportunity or wealth because that station is playing on a much higher channel. You have to physically, deliberately calibrate your hardware to the right frequency using the dial of autosuggestion. From the vast, invisible storehouse of the ether, the human mind is constantly attracting vibrations which harmonize with that which dominates it. If you vibrate at the frequency of abundance, your magnetized thoughts act as a beacon, naturally attracting the specific people, coincidental circumstances, and sudden opportunities required to physically build that abundance in the real world. Both poverty and riches are quite literally the offspring of thought. Before we dive into the final recap, just a reminder that these teachings can be found at waywat.com. And this was the explanation of the teachings of autosuggestion from the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill from waywat.com. For more teachings on the hidden architecture of reality, head to waywat.com. Now, let's summarize exactly what we've learned so you can put it into practice. Your mind is divided into two distinct parts, the conscious gatekeeper and the incredibly powerful, completely impartial subconscious soil. Autosuggestion is the absolute only way to plant the seeds of your desires into that soil. But remember, plain words without deep, visceral emotion are completely useless. Feeling is the only language the subconscious understands. You must intentionally utilize legitimate deceit, feeling the reality of your success right now to override your current physical circumstances. You build this into unshakable faith through relentless repetition, specifically by reading your exact written goals aloud right before sleep and right after waking, when the conscious guard is groggy. When the subconscious responds by handing you a hunch or a sudden plan, you must physically act on it immediately. By following this protocol, you deliberately tune your brain's broadcasting frequency, turning your mind into a magnetic beacon that attracts the exact opportunities you need. Ultimately, the most important idea you must carry with you today is this: whatever you repeatedly feed your mind with deep, burning emotion is accepted as absolute law, and your subconscious will relentlessly move heaven and earth to make it your physical reality.